ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। ॐ अखण्डमण्डलाकारम् व्याप्तं येन चराचरम् तत्पदं दर्शितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। Shivom friends, up to now we have gone through chapter 42 of Sthiti Khand, and now today we will be taking chapter 43. In this chapter there is description of varieties of living souls, and Vasishtha is continuing. The living souls, being derived from Brahma, assumes to itself the form of the mind and is tossed about with the thoughts and cares of the world. Then it is changed into thousands and millions of forms that it creates to itself in its imaginations. It has undergone many prior births and is in the course of migrating into many more. It will reincarnate into many more as multitudes as the fleeting particles of a waterfall. These atomic souls of living beings, being subjected to their desires by the great variety of their wishes, are made to wander under many forms to which they are bound by their desires only. They wander constantly in different directions and in distant countries, both by land and water. They live or die in those places like bubbles blow out only to float and burst and then sink in the water below. Some are produced for the first time in a new Kalp age, and others are born 100 times in it. Some have had only 2 or 3 births, while the births of others are beyond numbers. Some are yet unborn and are to be born yet on earth, and many others have passed their births by attainment of their liberation at last. Some are alive at present, and others are no more to be born. Some are born again and again for myriads of kalps. Some remain in one state all alone, and many in various states, repeatedly changing their forms and natures. Some are subjected to the great misery of hell, and some are destined to a little joy on earth. Some enjoy the great delights of the gods in heaven, and others are raised to the glory of the heavenly bodies above. Some are born as kinnars and gandhars, and others as vidyadhars and huge serpents. Some appear in the forms of the sun god Indra and Varun, and others in those of the three-eyed Shiva. And the lotus-born Brahma. Some become the Kushmanda demons and Vetal demon, ghost, and others as Yaksh and Rakshas demon cannibals. Some again become the Brahmins and the ruling class, and others become Vaishyas and the Shudras. Some become Swapach and Chandal, and others as Kiratis and Pukas tribals. Some become the grass and green on earth, and others as the seeds of fruits and roots of vegetables, or as moths and butterflies in the air. Some are formed into varieties of herbs and creeping plants, and others into stones and rocks. Some into jam and kadam trees, and others into sal, palm, and tamala forests. There are some placed in prosperous circumstances, becoming ministers and generals and rulers of estates, while others are clad in rags and remain as religious recluses, munis, and silent hermits in the woods. Some are born as snakes, serpents, worms, insects, and ants. There are others in the form of great lions, big buffaloes, deer, and goats, and fleet antelopes in forests. Some are the begotten as storks and cranes, ruddy geese, and cuckoos. Others become their pastures in the shapes of lotuses, water lilies, and other aquatic shrubs and flowers. Some are brought forth as elephants and their cubs, and as wild boars, bulls, and asses. Others come into being as bees and beetles, flies and gadflies, gnats and mosquitoes. Many are born to difficulties and dangers, and many to prosperity and adversity. Some are placed in hell pits, and others in their heavenly abodes. Some are situated in the stars, and some in the hollows of trees. Some move upon the wings of the winds, and others rest in the still air above or fly freely in the sky. Many dwell in the sunlight of the day, and many subsist under the moonbeams at night. There are others subsisting upon the beverage they draw from the herb like plants. Some are liberated in their lifetime and wander about freely in this earth. Others live in blissful states. Some are altogether free in their reliance in the Supreme Spirit. There are some that require long periods for their blessed and ultimate liberation. Others disbelieve the intellectuality and spirituality of mankind and dislike being reduced to the singleness of the one soul, or to be reduced to their oneness or unity with the Supreme Soul. Some become regents of the skies above, and earths roll down in the forms of mighty streams. Some become females of beautiful appearances, and others as ugly hermaphrodites and freaks. Some are of enlightened understandings, and some are darkened in their minds. Some are preachers and lecturers of knowledge, and others are in ecstatic consciousness of samadhi. The living souls who are dominated by their desires are so powerless of themselves that they have forgotten their freedom and are fast chained to their wishes. They rove about the world, now flying up and then falling down in their hopes and fears. They are constantly tossed up and down like play balls flung on all sides by the relentless hands of playful death. Trapped in the hundredfold snare of desires and converted to the various forms of their wishes, they pass from one body to another as birds fly from one tree to alight on another. The endless desires of the living soul, bred and led by the false imaginations of the mind, have spread this enchanted snare of illusion known by the name of the great world. Stupefied souls are doomed to wander about in the world like waters in a whirlpool, as long as they don't come to understand the true nature of their selves as self same with the Supreme Self. having known and seen the true self, by forsaking their false knowledge of their individual egos, they come to their consciousness of themselves as identical with the divine self. Having attained this in process of time, they are released from their doom of revisiting this world of pain and sorrow. However, there are some unconscious beings who, in spite of their attainment of this knowledge, after passing into 100 lives in it in various shapes, are so perverted in their natures that they have to return again to this earth. Some, after having attained higher states, fall down again by the lowness of their spirits and appear in the shapes of brute creatures, and at last have to fall into hell. There are some great minded souls who, having proceeded from the state of Brahma, have to pass here a single life, after which they are absorbed in the Supreme Self. There are multitudes of living beings in other worlds also, some of whom have become like the lotus born Brahma and others as Shiva. There are others who have become like the gods or brute creatures in them, and there are snakes and other reptiles also in them, as well as in this earth. There are other worlds as obvious to you as this earth, and there are many such worlds that have gone by, and others are yet to appear. In the other worlds, there are various other creatures of different shapes produced by various unknown causes and which have their growths and deaths like those of this earth. Some are produced as Gandharvas and others as Yakshas. Some are generated as Sur demigods and some others as Asur and Daitya gods. The manners and modes of life of the people in other parts of the globe are like those of men living in this part of the earth. All creatures move according to their own natures and mutual relations, for even more like the waves and currents of a river move forward, following and followed by others in regular succession. The entire creation moves onward in eternal progression in its course of evolution and involution, and in its motions of ascent and descent like the waves of the ocean. In this manner, multitudes of living beings with consciousness of their self-existence proceed from the Supreme Spirit, rising from and at last falling into it. All created beings are detached from their source like a light from the lamp and solar rays from the sun. They are like sparks of red hot iron and the flashing sparks of fire. They are like the minute moments of time and the flying orders of flowers, or the cold icicles and particles of rainwaters carried by breeze and cooling the air all around. The fitting particles of life flying from one spot to another and filling different bodies with animation are at last absorbed in the mainspring of vitality from where they had risen. Particles of vital air, being thus spread out and scattered over the universe, come to assume the various forms of animated beings in all the worlds, but they are all mere creations of our ignorance. In reality, they are like the rolling waves of water in the vast ocean of eternity. with this chapter 43 comes to an end. And in chapter 44, there is description of Brahma's self-birth. Ramji asked, now I understand how particles of the divine spirit takes the forms of living souls, but I cannot conceive how it assumes the physical body composed of bones and ribs. Vasishtha replied, why don't you know it, Ram? When I have explained it you before, where have you lost your deductive reasoning of arriving to the conclusion from those premises? All the physical bodies in the world and all these moving and unmoving persons and things are only false representations rising before us like the visions in our dreams. The phenomenal world differs from dreams only in it being a longer and more delusive. It is like the optical illusion of seeing a double moon or seeing a mountain in the delusion of darkness. The enlightened mind, cleared of its drowsiness of ignorance and freed from the chains of its desire, views the world to be no more than a dream. The world is a creation naturally conceived in the imagination of all living beings or the living souls. The world remains impressed upon the soul until the soul attains its final liberation. The fleeting essence of the soul is like the whirling current of waters, or like the germ of a seed, or more like the leaflet of a sprout. As the flower is contained in the branch and the fruit within its flowers, so this creation of the imagination is contained in the receptacle of the mind. As the ever-changing form of the chameleon exhibits only a particular color at a time, so the ever-varying mind shows only the form that is prominent in its thought for the time being. The same thought assumes a visible form, like clay taking the form of a pot. Good thoughts and actions of the prior state of life serve to give the soul a good form in its next birth on earth. We see the mighty lotus-born Brahma situated in the bud of that flower and find it to be the effect of good thoughts he had in his mind. This unlimited creation is the false fabrication of imagination, from which the living soul, in conjunction with the mind, obtains the state of Vrinchi, Brahma, the creator. Ram said, Sage, I need to be fully informed whether all other beings sprang from the same cause as Brahma, the lotus born. Varshiji answered, let me tell you again, O long-armed Ram, how Brahma has a body. From his example, you will learn about the existence of the world. The Supreme Soul, which is unlimited by time or space, of his own will and by the power of his omnipotence, takes the limited forms of time and space upon himself. The same becomes the living soul and is filled with the various desires in itself of becoming many. When this limited power, which is Brahma, thinks on the state of his having been the cosmic egg in his former state of existence in the prior kalpa, he is immediately transformed to the state which is in his mind and which is ever busy with its thoughts and imagination. First, it thinks of clear sky, the receptacle of sound, which is perceptible by the auditory organs. This thought, being condensed in the mind, makes it vibrate like the wind does the air. Then it thinks about the vibrations of air, which are the objects of feeling through the porous skin and mind. It is moved by the thought of air and wind to assume that form, which is invisible to the naked eye. The condensations of the elements of air and wind together produce the idea of light, which is the cause of sight and which has colors and forms for its objects. Thus, the mind, moved by its triple thoughts of air, wind, and light, produces the property of fire. These immediately join to produce the idea of coldness, the property of water. Then the mind forms the ideas of the four elements of air, wind, fire, and water. These united together produces the gross form of earth, the receptacle of scent. Then the mind, filled with its thoughts of these minute elementary particles, forsook its fine form of the spirit for its gross body of the five elements, the fifth being Akash. The mind saw this body shining like a spark of fire in the sky, which joined with its sense of self-ego and understanding formed its personality. This is called the spiritual body within the eightfold embodiment. What are those? Earth, water, fire, air, space, and mind, intellect, and identity. मन बुद्धि अहंकार. मन चित्त और अहंकार. The spiritual body is situated like a bee in the middle of the lotus-like heart, and it gives growth to the outer body by its inner working. It is thickened by the action and internal heating process of the heart, like the bale fruit or wood apple. The outer body receives the qualities of the inner mind. Just as a jewel shines with the luster of the little particle of gold melted and infused within, the quality of the inner soul or mind manifests itself in the outer body in the same way as the quality of a seed appears in the form and taste of its fruit. Then the mind dwells upon the thoughts of its actions, which are expressed in the different organs and actions of the body, all produced by the motion of inner thoughts and acts. Just like tree leaves and branches are projected by the inner process and operations of the seed. Its thoughts of up and down, lift and lower, its head and feet upward and downward. Its thoughts of both sides extend its two arms to the right and left. Its thoughts of backward and forward place, its back behind, and its breast and belly before. The hair of the head and fingers of the hands are like the filaments and twigs of trees. In this manner did Brahma, who is called a Muni and a mental being, because his body sprung from his mind, produce the different parts of his body according to his thoughts of their usefulness to him. He brought the body and its limbs to compactness, just as the seasons bring their fruits and grains to perfection. Thus everything is perfected in time, and all beings have their beautiful bodies and figures. He, Lord Brahma, was the progenitor of all beings, filled with the qualities of strength and understanding, activity, dignity, and knowledge. Being begotten by the empty Brahma, he resides in the lap of emptiness. He is of the form of melted gold, like every other luminous body in the heavens. Though situated in the Supreme, yet the mind of Brahma is liable to the mistakes of his own making. And at times, it quite forgets having no beginning, middle, or end, like his source. Sometimes, the Lord thinks he is identical with the waters that existed in his mind, before creation, at another as the cosmic egg, which was as bright as the fire of universal destruction. Sometimes the Lord thinks he is in the dark forest that covered the earth before creation of living animals, and then as a lotus bed. Afterwards, he became many forms at each phase and epoch of creation. Thus, Brahma became the preserver of many kinds of beings, which he created of his own will from his mind at each state or kalp period. Of these beings, Brahma was the first that issued from Brahma himself. When Brahma was the first begotten, he remained in his happy state of unconsciousness and forgetfulness. But being delivered from his mental inactivity in the womb, he came to see the light. He took a physical body with its breathings and respirations. It was covered with pores of hair and furnished with gums and 32 teeth. It had the 3 pots of skin bones, thighs, backbone standing on feet below, with the 5 ears, 5 partitions, 9 cavities, and smooth skin covering all the limbs. It is accompanied by twice 10 fingers and their nails, and with a couple of arms and palms, and 2 or more hands and eyes. The body is the nest of the bird of the mind, and it is the hole of the snake of lust. It is the cave of the goblin of greediness and the den of the lion of life. It is a chain at the feet of the elephant of pride, and it is a lake of the lotuses of our desires. The Lord Brahma looked upon his handsome body and saw that it was good. Then the Lord thought in himself, from his view of the 3 times of the past, present, and future, and from his sight of the vault of heaven, with a dark mist like a swarm of flying locusts, what is this boundless space? What had it been before? How did I come into being? Thus pondering in himself, he was enlightened in his soul. He saw in his mind the different past creations and recollected the various religions and their various sects which had grown upon earth one after another. He produced the holy Vedas as a spring does its flowers. He formed with ease all the varieties of creatures from their archetypes in his mind. He set them in their various laws and customs for their temporal and spiritual welfare, as he saw them in the city of his mind. From their prototypes in his eternal mind, Brahma thought upon the innumerable varieties of the scriptures which had existed before, and all of which came to exist on earth in their visible forms, like flowers springing from the womb of spring season. Thus, O Ram, did Brahma take up himself the form of the lotus born and create by his activity all the different creatures from the models of them that existed in his mind, and which took their various forms in the visible world at his will. So with this chapter 44 also comes to an end, and I think we should rest our today's session here itself. This session completed with the grace of Lord Ram, and I pray to Lord Ram again that we meet again in the next session, reading of chapter 45 onwards. Until then, Shiva Om, friends.